principles that we did not quite finish yet. If you remember, we were discussing the anomaly, the very unusual feature of the prayers of Shabbos, that they are the only Yom Tov in which there's a different beginning for Ma'ariv and for Shachris and for Mincha. This is called the bracha of Kedushas Hayom, that talks about the holiness of the day. And for every Yom Tov, including Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the bracha of Kedushas Hayom never varies between Ma'ariv, Shachris, and Mincha. And Shabbos is the only one that, although the last paragraph, Ritzei B'mnuchasenu, is more or less the same, with one difference I will get to, but the beginning is different. So I had given you, just to chazer very quickly, two terutzim which try to explain the significance of the difference between Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. The first was the teretz of the Avudraham, and the second was the teretz of the Torah. The Avudraham says that the different beginnings of the Shabbos Tefillah corresponds to stages in the progressive intimacy of a marriage union, with the idea that Shabbos is a marital union, a marriage between Hashem and the Jewish people. So it's a funny thing, in a sense, we're kind of hermaphrodites here, because the reason is, there are two marriages taking place on Shabbos. One is between Hashem and the Jewish people, and the other is between the Jewish people and Shabbos. Now, what's interesting is, our gender switches. In the marriage between Hashem and the Jewish people, Hashem is the Chassan, we are the Kala. But then, in our marriage with Shabbos, we become the Chassan, and Shabbos is the Kala. L'cha dodi l'kras Kala. Let's go greet the Kala. So it's interesting that we switch from the Zohar to the Nekeva, and that raises some interesting Kabbalistic issues that one could think about a lot. So the way the Avudraham explained it, there are three stages in marriage. There is Kiddushin, which is Erusin, the giving of the ring, but the Kala is not yet in the home of the Chassan. There is Nesuin, where the Chassan brings her into his home. That's the Yichud room, so to speak. And then there is finally actual consummation and union, which is the highest level of intimacy. And the Avudraham says, Friday night is Kiddushin, Atah Kiddashta, you sanctified us. Shabbos morning, we are brought into Hashem's home. And that's why Yismach Moshe, because the Iker Simcha of a wedding is Nesuin. Ersin, which used to be a year before Nesuin, was not a big Simcha, so to speak. And then finally, intimacy is Atah Echad, we become one with God. And that's the theme of Mincha. So according to the Avudraham, again, I'm reviewing this a little bit, we are going through the stages of getting closer and closer and closer to Hashem, starting with Kiddushin, and then Nesuin, and then the Yichud of Mamish Bia, whatever that means, Lagabe Hashem, obviously. This is not a physical reality, but it represents a spiritual level of closeness, that the highest level of closeness is Shabbos Mincha, Suda Shalishis. That's why the Zohar calls Suda Shalishis Rava de Ravin, which is Aramaic for the grace of grace, the highest level of grace from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the Avudraham. It's a very powerful idea in which every Shabbos you're going through the different stages of closeness to Hashem that are exemplified in marriage. The Torah gave a different approach, although it actually will overlap, and that is, the Torah says that the three tefillas of Shabbos correspond to the three great Shabboses, two of them in our past and one of them in our future. The first Shabbos is Shabbos Breitowitz, the Shabbos that Hashem rested after He created the world in 6 days. So the theme of Friday night is the Shabbos of creation. And that is why the paragraph that is read is Vayechulu Hashemayim. That Hashem made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. The next great Shabbos is the Shabbos of Matan Torah, because the Torah, the Ten Commandments, the Aseres HaDibros, were given on Shabbos. Now, this is not in the Chumash, but the Gemara says in Masechah Shabbos that Hakol Moedim Shabbos nitna Torah, the Torah was given on Shabbos. And that's why the theme of Shabbos morning is the revelation of Hashem giving the Torah, and that's why it mentions Moshe Rabbeinu bringing down the Luchos. Although that didn't happen on the day of Matan Torah, but that's part of the Matan Torah process. So, Friday night, creation. Shabbos morning, revelation. Now, the third great Shabbos isn't here yet, and that's Yemos HaMashiach, that are described, this is the Torah, that are described as Yom Shekulo Shabbos, the day of the eternal Shabbos. And that is the theme of Mincha, because that talks about the unity of Hashem, and that's Bayomahu Yiyah Hashem Echad Ishmo Echad. And remember, that means that even the Rachamim and the Din will not be seen as two different things, but even the Din of Hashem will be seen as Rachamim. So the unity of Hashem, meaning Rachamim and Din, get united again, because we will understand the meaning of the Din. That's a reference to Yemos HaMashiach. And even the unity of the Jewish people, Mi Ka'amcha Yisrael Goyachad B'Yaretz, is also a sign of Mashiach, because the Churban comes when there is sinas chinam, and Mimela, only with Avas Yisrael and Achdus can we bring the Geula. So, according to the Torah, the transition is the Shabbos of creation to the Shabbos of revelation to the Shabbos of Geula, the Shabbos of Mashiach, which is not a single day anymore, but now the whole Yom Shekulo Shabbos. When we say, by the way, Yom Shekulo Shabbos, we don't mean that every day is going to be Shabbos. That actually wouldn't make a lot of sense. If every day is going to be Shabbos, then that means Shabbos is not Shabbos anymore. But it means that the same way now we can feel Hashem more on Shabbos, Yemos HaMashiach, every day we will have that heightened awareness. And Shabbos will be more than that, right? Right? If the whole week is Shabbos, so Shabbos will become Shabbos plus, Shabbos squared, whatever it's going to be. In other words, you're not going to lose Shabbos because it's a Yom Shekulo Shabbos. And also, it's a Davar Pashut, according to the Rambam at least, that you're still going to have to work when Mashiach comes. So you will be doing Malacha. The Rambam basically says that Yemot HaMashiach will be wonderful. We'll have a Beis HaMikdash. Everyone will worship Hashem. But life will be normal. You still have to wait for a bus and whatever it will. Baruch Hashem, you probably will not have the demonstrations that we seem to have here every day actually. So Baruch Hashem, be grateful for that. But other than that, it'll be very crowded here. There'll be a lot of Jews here. Granted, Chazal say Eretz Yisrael will expand to accommodate all of the people, but still, the Rambam says, Olam kimin hagay nayeg. So you still will go to work, etc., and all those other things. Yeah.
So I know there's a Chazal that says that Shabbat is, so to speak, 1/60th of Olam Haba.
Yep.
Does that mean that every day would have that? It wouldn't be quite like Olam Haba. It would be much less than Olam Haba.
That is a possibility, because remember that the Rambam sharply differentiates between Mashiach and Olam Haba. They're not the same. And remember the difference. Olam Haba is the world of the neshama, the world of the soul. There is no guf. There is no eating and drinking. It's a world of pure ruchnius. Yemos HaMashiach is wonderful, but we're still in a physical body, we're still working, we're still eating, so it would make sense in a way that as wonderful as Yemos HaMashiach is, it will be much less than Olam Haba. In fact, the Gemara says this. The Gemara says that the Gemara in Brachos says, all of the glorious prophecies of the Nevi'im are about Mashiach. But Olam Haba is indescribable. So the Gemara actually makes that point, that we can talk about what Mashiach will be, but we cannot talk about what Olam Haba is going to be. It's something we cannot understand. Only Hashem understands what Olam Haba is. So what you're saying is actually a Gemara in Brachos. Okay, so this is, so we have these two very beautiful answers. We have the Avudraham, that it is the stages of marriage, and we have the Torah, that it represents Bria, Matan Torah, and Yemos HaMashiach. And I would just point out that the Torah's 3 steps of Shabbos correspond to Rav Yosef Albo's 3 Ikrei Emuna. Again, forgive me for reviewing, but remember the Rambam had 13 principles of faith. Rav Yosef Albo, around 200 years later, in the famous Sefer Ha'ikarim, the book of fundamental principles, says, no, there's only 3 things that are Ikrei Emuna. 3 foundational principles. There is one God who created heaven and earth. That God gave us the Torah at Sinai, or started the process at least. And number 3, there is ultimate reward and punishment for good and evil. Those are the 3 Ikrim. So they actually correspond to the idea. Hashem is creator. Hashem revealed himself. And Yemosah Mashiach is the ultimate reward and punishment for good and evil. So it's very interesting that the Torah does not bring Rav Yosef Albo. In fact, the original was, I believe, after the Torah. I have to check the dates. But either way, I'm not aware of the Torah ever bringing Rav Yosef Albo. But it is interesting that the Torah's understanding of the 3 elements of Shabbos do correspond with Rav Yosef Albo's 3 Ikarim. By the way, Rav Yosef Albo himself says that his 3 Ikarim correspond to the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. You may recall, although we're not in that time of year, but it's good to think about it even now, that the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah has 3 middle brachos, not just 1 middle bracha, 3 middle brachos that have different themes. One is called Malchuyos. These are verses that deal with Hashem as Melech. Then we have Zichronos, and we blow shofar after each section. After Malchus, we blow shofar, at least in the repetition. Some blow in the silent even. And Zichronos are verses of remembrance. Hashem remembers the good deeds of our forefathers. And then Shofaros, these are verses about the shofar. So Rav Yosef Albo says, Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofaros also correspond to his 3 fundamental principles of faith. Hashem is our king because he is the creator of heaven and earth. That's Malchios. Hashem as creator. Zichronos is reward and punishment. God's memory, essentially, is the mechanism by which God rewards and punishes evil. And shofar is the shofar of Har Sinai, the shofar of Matan Torah, revelation. So this idea of these 3 principles is a very encompassing idea. The 3 principles of faith, the 3 stages of Shabbos, and Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, the 3 stages of the Rosh Hashanah davening. And even though the Rambam gives us 13, Rav Albo made the argument that some of what the Rambam called Ikar, a fundamental principle, is really a derivative. It's a branch. He says not everything a Jew believes, or must believe even, qualifies as a fundamental principle. It may be a derivative. For example, according to Rav Albo, just give you an example, if a person denied physical resurrection, let's say a person took the position that I believe in reward and punishment, and I believe that after death the soul is rewarded by God in Olam Haba, but I don't believe the body is going to come back. Let's say a person said that position, I don't believe the body will come back. According to the Rambam, such a person is a heretic. Such a person is an apikoros. He is denying a fundamental principle of Judaism, which happens to be the 13th principle. I believe in the resurrection of the dead. Rav Albo would classify it this way. Rav Albo would say, listen, resurrection of the dead is ultimately a detail in how God will reward us. So as long as I believe in the fundamental principle of reward and punishment, even if I make a mistake regarding resurrection of the dead, I am not making a mistake in a fundamental principle. I am making a mistake in a derivative principle, in a branch rather than a root. And therefore, I might be mistaken, but I am not heretical. Now again, this is very important because I want to be sure you understand this. Some people will paraphrase Rav Albo and say, Rav Albo did not believe in physical resurrection of the dead. I hope you're following me here. That's absolutely not true. Rav Albo believed in every single thing the Rambam believed in. Rav Albo certainly believed in resurrection of the dead. And he said, if a Jew does not believe in resurrection of the dead, he is wrong. Okay, he's not arguing with the Rambam on the substance, but he is arguing with the Rambam on the classification. Meaning, according to the Rambam, my disbelief of resurrection is a heretical belief that excludes me from Klal Yisrael. According to Rav Albo, it is an erroneous belief, but it is not heretical. Okay, again, this is such an important point, I will repeat it. Do not never understand Rav Albo as denying resurrection. That is not the case at all. This is simply a matter, it's not simply, but it's an important matter, but this is a matter of definition and classification. This is not a matter of what do you believe. Okay, that's very important, because a lot of people misunderstand, because Rav Albo will bring a lot of proofs that, that maybe there's not physical resurrection, but he's only doing that kind of as a devil's advocate to show that you're not a heretic because you can have a reasonable basis for your erroneous belief. Okay, it's a little tricky. But, he's making a case for mistakes that he himself would not subscribe to, but he's just offering a defense why you're not an apikoris if you have such a... In fact, he even says it about God having a body. According to the Rambam, if I believe that God could have a physical form, God has a physical form, I'm a heretic. Because one of the Ikrei Amuna is God does not have a body. So Rav Albo brings all of the verses that talk about the hand of God and the head of God and the eyes of God to show that God could have a body. Now again, Rav Albo is not saying God has a body. Rav Albo is just saying that since there are verses that could lead a person to that mistake, we would not call him an apikoris. Okay? The Breitowitz says the same thing when the Rambam says, if you believe God has a body. Now, in truth, there are some Rishonim, very few, who actually say God does have a body, meaning Rav Albo wasn't saying it. But there are some Rishonim that actually God has a body, which is kind of remarkable. And if you think about it, the notion that God does not have a body, one might argue, just to play devil's advocate here, that is a contradiction to God's omnipotence, because it goes back to the old idea, is there anything God cannot do? Right? Can God make an object that's too heavy for him to lift? Can God commit suicide? Now, if you're going to say God can't kill himself, then you're saying, so there's one thing God cannot do? Now, this is kind of along the same line of that conundrum. God cannot have a body. Yeah? Well, what if he wants to have a body? Are you saying he can't if he wants to? Meaning, how can you talk about God cannot do something? So one could even make the argument that at least the possibility of God assuming a body is implicit in the notion of divine omnipotence. But, as I say, the Rambam absolutely says this is a heretical idea. Rav Albo, once again, agrees with the Rambam that God does not have a body, but he says it's not a fundamental principle. It is a derivative principle. It is a branch rather than a root. So if I believe God has a body, I might be an idiot, I might be stupid, I might be deeply in error, but I'm not a heretic. And that's important to know. It's important to know that not every mistake a person makes them an apikoros. Although living in Israel, you would not get that impression. I mean, if a person believes yeshiva students should serve in the army, you could say that's a very deep mistake, but he's not an apikoros. That's a wrong use of language. In other words, we kind of describe everybody who says something that is, maybe wrong as heretical. It's not heretical. It's just it may be wrong. It may be misguided. It may be tragically misguided. As strong as you feel about it, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly good. But I'm just talking about language here, but it's not apikoros. It's something else. And that's a very important point, that people can make all sorts of mistakes, and the mistakes could even be tragic, but it's not apikoros because it's not a denial of a fundamental principle of faith. Okay, if you have a cell phone without a filter or a computer, that's a big mistake. It is a big mistake. I agree, it's a big mistake. But you're not an apikoros. You can't use that language for that. That's not an appropriate use of language. Yeah.
So today, how do most people deal with people that believe in the resurrection? What would most people popkin, or would they be in trouble, or what happens?
Well, let me put it this way. There's kind of the official view in the Torah world is that the Rambam's 13 principles are foundational, and anyone who denies any detail of the 13 principles is an apikoros. That's technically. The question then becomes, can there be mitigating circumstances like tinok shenishpa for apikoros? That's another machlokas, meaning you were not raised to ever know these things. On the other hand, I will tell you privately, many do rely on Rabbi Yosef Albo. They basically say, okay, Rabbi Yosef Albo says there are 3 fundamental principles. And as long as someone believes in the 3, they could at least be the Eved, they could be considered to be a Jew. So there's a difference, again, I'm being honest with you, there's a difference sometimes between the public proclamations and the individual psukim that are given. In fact, this is always the case, and maybe I'm being too open here, but this comes up with a lot of issues. I mean, Ikrei Emunah is a biggie, actually the biggest one, but it comes up a lot with secular education. It comes up a lot with serving in the army, meaning there may be a public stance that as a general rule, we do not encourage people to do certain things. But when it comes to the individual one-to-one, a person might be advised, even by a real Haredi Rosh Hashiva, that for them the army might be okay, or for them going to college might be the right thing. So there is a big difference between what the public position is for everybody, generally, versus how you deal with an individual. And that really highlights, I would say, the greatness of our leaders, that they don't simply, in fact, that's why sometimes the followers are not as sophisticated. The followers think, one size fit all, we got the rule, this applies to everybody. A gadol understands that there are individuals that have different needs, different circumstances, and therefore, even if we have a general category, we understand that there are going to be exceptions to that general category. And as I say, sometimes the followers don't get that, and that's a big chisaron. Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Think about the God's hand. It's all metaphorical, right?
So that's what the Rambam says. In other words, the Rambam, in fact, Chelek Aleph of the Moreh Nevuchim, a big part of the Moreh Nevuchim is actually a Tanakh dictionary, where the Rambam goes through all of the human-like descriptions of Hashem in Tanakh. The hands of Hashem, the eyes of Hashem, etc. Emotions even. Anger of Hashem. And the Rambam shows these are metaphors, these are mishalim, these are not meant to be taken literally. It's just meant to give us some idea that we can grasp by comparing it to our experience. Even anger, the Rambam says, and this is a little tricky, the Rambam says God does not have emotions. God does not get angry. Like you say, God got so angry that he got smashed, because when God breaks a glass, he breaks the world. Right? So it's not like God lost his temper and destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. That's not how it works. Rather, the Rambam says any emotional description of Hashem is simply putting a label on an action which, if done by a human being, would have been indicative of that feeling. In other words, Hashem did something. Hashem destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. Hashem created exile. Now, if a human being were to wreak havoc on that scale, we would describe the emotion behind the action as anger. So we say, God is angry because he did actions that are indicative of the emotion of anger, but you are not describing an inner emotional state. And that's even true the other way. God is merciful. Again, many people find it difficult to relate to the Rambam's idea of Hashem. He said, no, Hashem doesn't have the emotion of mercy. Hashem doesn't feel sorry for you. But rather, when Hashem has decided to do things that if a human were to do them would be described as kind and compassionate and good, so we put the emotional label on the action. In other words, the Rambam is very emphatic that you cannot describe inner emotional states of the Almighty. This is the famous doctrine that is known by philosophers as the doctrine of negative attributes. And the doctrine of negative attributes mean you can only say what Hashem is not. You cannot say what Hashem is. I can say what Hashem is not because I can identify everything I am and say, Hashem is not me. I'm angry, I'm kind, whatever it is, right? So I can say, Hashem is not that. In other words, because I can't describe Hashem's inner emotional states. Now, this is not the time or place for this. The Rambam was very, very emphatic in removing any vestige, I'm going to use a fancy word, but I know you guys know it, of anthropomorphism about God. Anthropomorphism is simply ascribing human-like characteristics to God. And the Rambam was relentless in trying to uproot any type of human attribution to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anthropomorphism is a tendency that we have in a lot of areas, both going high above us and below us, right? We anthropomorphize our dogs. We make believe our dogs are like humans, understanding whatever it would be. And lahavdil, infinite havdalas, we anthropomorphize the Almighty as well. And the Rambam was actually against both types of anthropomorphism. The problem with the Rambam's, it's an emotional problem, it's not an intellectual problem, is that it's very hard for us to have a relationship with a God that does not feel love or anger or doesn't react, etc. How do you have a relationship to someone if God does not intrinsically have the emotion of love? So as a result, I just want to point out that in the world of Chassidus and Kabbalah, it's a very, very different. There they do talk about Hashem feeling and Hashem emoting and Hashem yearning. And even in Tanakh, the truth is that's the language of the Nevi'im in Tanakh as well. So obviously, on our Madrega, we cannot be machriya in all of this. But the point is, there is an alternative Havana of our relationship to Hashem that focuses much more on the possibility of an emotional connection. The Rambam seems to make that emotional connection to Hashem very, very difficult by kind of removing every vestige of emotion and feeling from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But even the Mekubalim, ultimately, they say, on the level of what's called the Ein Sof, the Ein Sof is the ultimate essence of God. Their talk is nothing we can say at all, and it's only on the level of Spheros, which is the interaction, that we can talk about feelings, emotions, and the like. So it's a complicated issue. Yeah.
So in relation to Torah's take on the three necessities on Shabbat.
Of the what on Shabbat? Didn't hear you.
Well, the Torah's take on the three
Yes.
So are there any inyanim for Seulah Shlishi to kind of be
Okay, so here, so that's very good. So this is what I wanted to finish up with here, and that is, let's take the Torah's idea, and what I want to suggest to you is a little extension of the Torah's idea, that these three ideas of creation, revelation, and redemption are not just describing things that will happen to Klal Yisrael, or happened or will happen, but they are actually things that we experience as individuals every Shabbos. That, or at least we can, not that, again, I want to emphasize, not that we do, but we can. That goes back to the idea of preparing yourself. That is, every single Shabbos we can go through three experiences of being created, of receiving Hashem's Torah in our lives, and of being redeemed. Now let me explain how this is. The basic idea of being recreated is that, it says in the Torah, Sheishes Yomim Tasem Malachtecha. For 6 days you shall do your work. And then comes Shabbos. By the way, parents love this pasuk. I don't know at least if they know Chumash a little bit, because they always will tell their son in Kollel, says, hey, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, 6 days you shall work, and then on the 7th day you rest. So the same way there's a mitzvah of resting on Shabbos, you got to work for 6 days. Right? Parents love to use that pasuk a lot when their child is in Kollel. But the Mechilta does give a different interpretation to it. The Mechilta says it's a psychological directive. That when the 6 days are up, you should enter Shabbos feeling that all of your work is done. I mean, listen, let's face it. You're in yeshiva, so your schedule, Baruch Hashem, is focused on Torah. But if you're working in a job or you're working in college, whatever it is, it's clear that you never enter Shabbos with everything finished. There's always going to be stuff hanging over your head. And yet, psychologically, you have to be reborn. You have to feel that you're recreated. So the first level of Shabbos, which is really the lowest level, but it's a wonderful level, is I am reborn. I am recreated, free of all of the burdens that pushed me down during the week. The psychological liberation of rebirth. Some of you might have heard of the author Herman Wouk, who had just died, I think, maybe a year or two ago. He was over 100. He was still writing novels, I think, in his late 90s. And Herman Wouk was a frum person. He grew up in an Orthodox home. I think he left it for a few years, but then he became a Baal Tshuva. He actually wrote an excellent book about Introduction to Judaism. This Is My God. You may have heard about it. It's a very good book, and kind of an introduction to Judaism, interspersed with anecdotes from his own life. So he tells a story in This Is My God that one of his novels was The Cain Mutiny, which actually became a famous novel, and it was a Broadway show apparently. And it was the first novel of his that was produced as a Broadway show. And he was the co-director, the co-producer. So they were working like around the clock, 18-hour days to get it ready for Broadway. And it was going to open Saturday night on Broadway. Big deal, Broadway, Saturday night. So around 2 o'clock Friday afternoon, he said to the other co-producer, I got to go now, I'll see you later. So the co-producer figured he was going to the bathroom for 5 minutes or going to get a cup of coffee. He said, okay, but be back in 20 minutes. So Herman Wouk said, you don't understand. I'm going away for 30 hours. The play is going to open up 8 p.m. I will be back like 15 minutes before opening tomorrow. And he said, the guy looked at him. The guy couldn't even say anything. His mouth was open. He says, our play is opening up in 30 hours, and you're going to be gone for the vast majority of that time. How could that possibly be? That's like beyond logic. And Herman Wouk said, I think, that was the first time that he realized really what Shabbos is. Shabbos says, just, to quote Nancy Reagan, just say no. That the world, unless it's literally a matter of life and death, pikuach nefesh, if it's not pikuach nefesh, there's nothing that is so important that it stops me from connecting to Shabbos. And that's quite amazing. All sorts of, because there's so many important things, people. By the way, interesting shaila. I mean, I'm not going to paskin on it. When Prime Minister Naftali Bennett flew to Russia, I think last Shabbos. And Naftali Bennett, like him or don't like him, but he's a Shomer Shabbos person. And I assume that the basis for his flying was he held that if he could contribute to stopping the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, that could save lives, and therefore pikuach nefesh. Again, I'm not sure if you have to do it on Shabbos. I mean, even for pikuach nefesh, something that could be done after Shabbos without any extra injury. I mean, if the pshat is he could end the war on Shabbos, that's one thing. But it wasn't going to be that type of thing anyway. Okay, so I'm not questioning it, but this was a pikuach nefesh. type of situation. So Herman Welk said, unless it's pikuach nefesh, the world does not own me. That's what Friday night is about. Friday night is about the freedom of not being a slave to the world. And that's a wonderful feeling. That's exhilarating. You're like a newborn baby, free of all of the responsibilities. Of course, that doesn't actually apply if you're a shul rabbi where your main work is on Shabbos, but okay, that's a separate issue. Okay, now, but here is the thing. Here is where Shabbos morning comes in. Freedom is not enough. Being free from the demands of the outside world does not yet give your life meaning or purpose. Because the question always becomes, freedom to be what? Freedom to do what? Even Erich Fromm, a disciple of Freud, happened to be Jewish, but they're not religious, he said, the Western world makes a big mistake when it defines freedom as freedom from something. Freedom has to be freedom towards something. Right? Freedom is not a purpose for life. Freedom might be a condition to be able to achieve a purpose. But it does not give you the content of that purpose. And that's where Shabbos morning comes in. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, not just to make us free. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim to give us a Torah, give us direction. And therefore, if Friday night is a celebration of the freedom that Shabbos gives me, Shabbos morning is a celebration of submitting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and using our freedom to serve Him. Okay? And therefore, really the relationship between Friday night and Shabbos morning is the same relationship as Pesach to Shavuos. Pesach is the holiday of freedom, Zman Cherusenu. Shavuos is the holiday of Matan Torah. But Pesach and Shavuos are joined as one holiday through what? The counting of the Omer. Because what is the idea? Freedom without Torah is animalistic. Same thing. The celebration of freedom, Friday night, creation, would be incomplete. Now, so this is the idea here. What we're doing is we're taking the Torah and we're applying it to us as individuals. On one hand, I celebrate the fact that the world does not own me. I am not a slave to my job. I am not a slave to society. I am not a slave to the rat race. I am a free person. And that's a wonderful thing. But Shabbos morning reminds you that your freedom has to be directed and channeled to serve Hashem. We then come to the idea of redemption. And redemption, of course, as a mass phenomenon is a reference to Mashiach. But the Maharal points out that Golus can exist in many ways. There can be Golus in terms of not being in my land, not having a Beis HaMikdash. But there can also be a Golus within yourself, a fragmentation, in which there is a bridge, there is a discontinuity, a chasm, an abyss between your head and your heart. Right? All of us know this. They say from Rav Nachman of Breslov that there's no greater distance in the world than between the head and the heart. Right? The head knows what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to daven. I'm supposed to learn. I'm supposed to do mitzvahs. But I don't have the feeling. I don't have the passion. I don't have the excitement. My emotions are lagging behind my cognition. And that's a state of galus. So Geula, in that sense, is not just Mashiach Beis HaMikdash. Geula is when your emotions are in sync with your mental understandings. That is called internal redemption. And that is achieved by Mincha, ideally, Suda Shlishis, in which my feelings have caught up to those things that I know, right? I know many, many things. but my feelings aren't always there. And by Suda Shalishis, you could, not that we do, but you could reach that particular level. And that's why it talks about unity, because it's unity not only with Hashem and with other people, it's a unity within myself, between the head and the heart. Now, with this, so what I'm trying to do with a little bit as an addition to the Torah is to show you how the Torah's 3 Shabboses correspond to our Avodah as individuals, the freedom that Shabbos gives us, the submission to Hashem, and the inner redemption of the emotion and the mind. Now, this actually explains, I had said that the second paragraph of the Kedushas Hayom is the same, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu, Ritzei b'Mnuchasenu. But it's not 100% the same. There's one little difference, and that is how we refer to Shabbos. In Ma'ariv, we say, V'yanuchu va, we will rest in her. Shabbos is called the feminine. Shabbos morning, V'yanuchu vo, we will rest in him. Shabbos is male. Shabbos mincha, V'yanuchu vam, we will rest in them. Combination. Now some are not goris that, but the normal nusach of the Cedar has ba, vo, and bum. Where does that come from? So according to this explanation, you can actually see it. If Friday night is about freedom, being reborn, Shabbos is like your birth mother. Shabbos is borning you, there's such a word, into a new existence where you're not mishubad to all of those obligations. So Friday night is Shabbos as mother. Shabbos day, which focuses on Matan Torah, Shabbos is father, because the Mishnah in Kedushin says that the primary obligation of teaching a child Torah is from the father. Shabbos mincha, which is about integrating the mind and the emotion. There's a plural here because you're taking 2 facets of human existence and bringing them together. So it's a beautiful thing that according to this extension of the Torah, you can actually explain the ba, bo, and bum of Shabbos. Okay? All right, so that's kind of this explanation on the tefillas of Shabbos. Okay, so we'll see you tomorrow.